Hey, you all. Thanks so much for coming out and for joining. My name's Sierra. I use she, her pronouns. I'm on the NEC, on the Outreach and Training Subcommittee, and I am part of the Cincinnati DSA chapter. Um, would love to hear a little bit more from the folks who haven't shared already in the chat while we're introducing ourselves, where you all are joining us from. Drop your name, your pronouns, your chapter. And as Hannah mentioned, if you have a favorite socialist candidate, go ahead and drop it in the chat so we can get to know who else is on the call. Really excited to see you all out. And I'll give you just a moment to drop in that information in the chat. And I don't know if Hannah, you want to take a moment to introduce yourself again here for the folks who hopped on.
Sure, I would love that. My name is Hannah, she, her pronouns, and I'm also a member of the National Electoral Committee with Sierra and Katie, who will be hopping on shortly. I'm actually a member of a different subcommittee, fun fact, not outreach. I am a member of the fundraising and comms or communications subcommittee, which I like to think of as kind of like a super group because it combined those two committees. Yeah, super happy to be here. And as I mentioned before, if you're just hopping on, we would love to know kind of where people are at, what questions you have about this topic right off the bat. So if you have questions as we're going, you can go ahead and type them in the chat, and we can kind of scroll back through at the end and make sure we're hitting them as well.
Awesome.
We'll have lots of time for questions at the end.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. Thanks, Michael, joining us from Scottsdale, Marshall from Helena, Liz from Baltimore, and Ronald from Lexington, just right down the road. Ronald, good to have you all on. If you all need closed captions or prefer to have them on, you can do that. I believe if you just go down to the bottom of your screen, it should have a closed captions option, or if not, you can click the more button and see if it's there. And if you have any difficulties with that, feel free to send Hannah and I a DM and we can help get you set up with that. But awesome. We'll go ahead, dive into the presentation. I'll first go through the agenda. So we're going to be taking a few moments to get started talking about Pathway to Victory. Then we'll dive into a couple of different methods that are the most popular for reaching out to voters, especially for electoral campaigns, going through canvassing, phone banking, texting, relational organizing. And then we're going to have an interactive activity so you all can apply some of the lessons and some of the topics that we talked about to either a scenario in your own chapter, or we're happy we have some provided scenarios, some already thought through scenarios that we can provide you all too. And then we're going to jump into breakout rooms with a couple of folks in each one. So you'll have a chance to get to know some of your other comrades that are working on these amazing issues all across the country, as well as kind of brainstorming what you all just learned and kind of applying it to situations, either, something you have going on in your chapter right now, or, something somebody else is working on in their chapter. And of course, we'll have plenty of time at the end for Q&A because we know a big value of this is getting to chat with folks, kind of getting their opinion on specific issues that you're maybe thinking through or ideas you have, and, hearing what other folks in different chapters are done too. So Hannah and I certainly don't want to spend the whole time talking. We really want to hear from you all, hear all the amazing work that you're going on and what questions, thoughts, comments you have, all that good stuff. But yeah, the overall theme today, keep it simple. Simple is always good, especially when reaching out to folks. But I will toss it over to Hannah to dive into a little bit about the Pathway to Victory.
Awesome. Thank you, Sierra. So we want to kind of frame our discussion today of how to reach voters in this lens of what is our pathway to victory. So we want to go over a couple terms. Maybe these are familiar to you, maybe they're not. Again, feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go. You may hear my Slack noises in the background from my various DSA Slacks. So the first term that we want to kind of introduce you to is this concept of a win number. So win number is basically the number of votes that your campaign is trying to get in order to win, right? So the win number could be anything from 100, it could be 10. I've seen some neighborhood council races where it's 10, it could be 100,000. It just depends on what district or jurisdiction that your candidate is running for. And it's sort of on you to figure it out and work on it. It's like a sort of a math problem to figure out. You can look at past voting data, how many people turned out. You can look at the number of people who live in that area who are eligible to vote. There are many ways to sort of predict this. But the way we look at it is with this sort of algorithm of likely turnout divided by 2 plus 1, right? So that's how we kind of look at your win number. And what is the point of a win number? The point of a win number is it tells us how many votes are we trying to get and how are we going to reach those voters effectively. And as I'm sure folks are familiar, DSA campaigns, sometimes we have a lot of money for our campaigns, sometimes we don't have much money at all. And that's totally okay. It's about being efficient and effective. So we're going to be focusing on canvassing, text banking, and phone banking, as well as relational organizing. And we'll talk about, what are the cost of some of these, right? So some of these tools are actually free. There's some relational organizing type tools that are free. So we'll talk about not just how many voters can you contact with these techniques, but what is the contact rate, right? So if you have volunteers, if you hear a sound, that's me grabbing a treat for my dog because he's bothering me. So this concept of a contact rate is basically how many people can you speak with or how many IDs, meaning an ID is kind of like knowing where a voter is at, right? Are they a strong supporter of Sierra White for Supreme Court justice? Bad example since we don't elect them. But are they a strong supporter of Sierra White for school board in Cincinnati, let's say? Or are they kind of on the fence? They're not sure if they support Sierra White. They might support Katie instead, right? And our contact rate is basically dependent on things like how fast people walk in a neighborhood, how spaced out houses are, how long are their phone conversations, and how quickly can they get connected to a new voter on the phone. There are, all those factors. So we kind of have those two terms. And then the last one to think about is goal setting. So in a campaign, maybe you all have had this experience, it can be really effective to have quantitative goals, numerical goals of how many voters you're trying to reach and how. So that could be as simple as we're going to reach 100 voters by leaving door hangers on their doors, or we're going to reach 10,000 specific voters by knocking on 50,000 doors, right? And making contact with 10,000. Any questions about this concept before we get into our specific tactics? Go for it, Sierra.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Hannah. Diving into the win number, all this good stuff will be part of our activity that we're going to dive into later too. So we'll have a chance to kind of put that into practice and think through what some win numbers might look like for some races that we have coming up. Awesome. So why canvassing? So the first thing that we're going to talk about is canvassing or knocking on doors, going out, chatting with folks at their home, meeting them where they are. I'm super happy to talk about this because this is one of my favorite things to do on campaigns. I love going out, knocking on doors, and in all the times I've worked on field, like this is always my favorite part is leading these canvas trainings, getting folks out, all that good stuff. So canvassing is the most effective tool that we have so far for persuading folks that we don't know. So going out, talking to people that we're not connected with, talking to people at their doors. And when races are close, or when they're a really small race, like if it's a school board race or a local, a really hyper local race, having a really well organized door knocking machine can really affect the results of the race, right? Because you're getting out there, you're getting the name out there. And it can be a really cost-effective way to do that, right? You don't need a bunch of digital ads that are super targeted. You don't need to do a lot of different stuff. You can just have some folks that, are really excited about the candidate and then can go out there and knock on doors and kind of flip some of these smaller races, especially. But even in bigger races, right? It's really key. Like even something at the scale of Bernie at the presidential, going out, knocking on doors, talking to folks we don't already know, letting them know what's happening and why we're excited about it is really awesome. And there's lots of different ways to canvass depending on what the situation is, depending on, if it's an issue based or if it's a candidate that's up for option, or if it's persuasion versus the get out the vote. And so I'll dive a little bit into what that means. So persuasion is that window of time that we have a couple of months before the election, or even up to a year before, right? If it's a really big presidential race, where we're out there talking to folks, seeing what issues are important to them, seeing what things they're most concerned with, letting them know what our biggest concerns are while we're supporting that candidate, having a little bit of those longer conversations with folks to try to, persuade them, to try to move them to support our candidate or issue or whatever it is that we're out there, fighting for, spreading the word about. And so that window of time is really great to flip people's support or get people excited who wouldn't have been necessarily already excited for your candidate. And the get out the vote phase, or GOTV, as it's called a lot of times on campaigns, is the period right before the election. So if there's not early vote or anything like that, GOTV tends to be those last 4 days before Tuesday. So that's Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Now a lot of places have early vote, which is amazing, right? And so that window expands to capture all of that time that folks can go to vote. And basically the conversations we're having during Get Out the Vote are a little more concise. They're a little more targeted. We really want to make sure folks have all the information they need to make it out to the poll. They have their plan to vote. They know where they're going to go, what time they're going to go, if they can bring 3 friends with them, all that good stuff. If y'all have been out canvassing before for anything like that, that'll probably sound really familiar, and happy to dive into best practices around that and any questions you all have later during our Q&A time too. But something I wanted to mention with canvassing and knocking on doors is there's around a 20% contact rate. So if your chapter hasn't knocked on doors a bunch before, if you haven't knocked on doors, it's good to kind of keep that in mind, because sometimes if folks don't have that context, they can be a little discouraged if they're going out, they have a packet of say 40 or 50 doors, they talk to, let's say, 7 or 8 people, they might think, oh, wow, nobody was home, right? But if you set the context for them, like, hey, if we're able to talk to 20% of people, like, that's fantastic, right? That's like an amazing day. And if we are able to get, a higher rate above that, then that's awesome. And so sometimes with all of these methods of communication, it's good to have the context of like, what are the standard rates of like getting in touch with people, and just setting that tone for your chapter and for the other volunteers that you have coming out, so they kind of know what their expectations are, right? Because if they're kind of going out thinking they're going to talk to all 40 or 50 people on their list, they might be a little bit disappointed when they only get that 20% contact rate, when in reality that's perfect and they're right on target, and they're doing exactly what they should be, and at the standard rate. And so it's also really good related to that, to kind of let folks know how long or how much of an expectation it is, and like how many doors they'll get knocked. And this really varies depending on what part of the country you live in, and also just precinct to precinct can look really different, right? Like even in a city, you could have one precinct where it's like very dense, you're able to knock out 50 doors super quick because you're basically just taking one step, to knock all the doors. Or if you're able to get in some of the apartment complexes, it can go really quickly. But other times, it might be a more suburban community, or you might have to like walk up some hills. So just keeping all of that stuff in mind as you're kind of mapping out like where folks are going to go, setting the expectations for how many doors they're going to knock, whether it's urban or rural. And a lot of this stuff is kind of trial and error too, right? So maybe the first couple of times you all go out, you kind of time yourself, see how long it takes, see what the different neighborhoods look like. So that way you can have that context for new folks that are coming out and help prepare them, for what's to come. But there's some examples on here. Katie mentioned that in Austin, it takes about a packet of 50 doors, takes around 10 hours, and you'll have about 10 conversations with folks when you're out chatting with them. I've knocked on doors, and I'm from Western Kentucky, knocked on doors out in Western Kentucky a lot. And sometimes you're driving between houses, right? Because it's so far. And so that'll be a more realistic, might be like a 20 door packet that you're going to get done in that, 2 hour, 3 hour time frame, right? And so just kind of setting those expectations and being realistic about what folks can do. And how they're able to do it, and what works best for different neighborhoods and stuff like that too. Something I wanted to mention here is it's really good to pay attention to like what areas have apartment complexes and if those apartment complexes are accessible, because apartment complexes are a great place to knock if you know, can get in, if you're allowed to be there, if it has external doors, all that good stuff. That's like a really amazing place to go and hit. But other times you can send volunteers out and they won't be able to get in. And so it's important to kind of keep track of that so you won't send folks again there in the future and all that good stuff. And the next part is getting access to some of these tools. And so the first thing I want to mention is that we, on the Outreach and Training Committee, Katie and I, and a couple of other folks love doing individual trainings for chapters on how to dive into specific things that you all need in real time. And so something we could do if you all haven't used these tools before is set up a call with your chapter, go through it with a couple different leaders of how to create lists, how to cut turf, how to track data, how to create scripts, go through kind of how to do all of those things kind of on a one-on-one level. So you have those actions, you know, that you can immediately go out from there and like get knocking on doors or whatever it may be. But certainly if there's any kind of thing that you ever want a training around, definitely always feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to connect you with somebody who can help you answer all your questions, all that good stuff, or point you in the right direction. But I'm not sure if Hannah, if you or Katie wouldn't mind to drop these links in the chat as well, because I know folks can't click on them in the presentation. So that way, if y'all have them, the first one on here is our Calendly link. So feel free to save that so you all can use that at whatever time throughout the year if you need it. To set up a meeting with us, to chat through any questions, to do training, whatever it is. The next thing that's on here, I don't know if Katie, if you can share these as well. Awesome, thank you. This is just a minivan guide. So there's lots of guides around everywhere, and that's something we're working on as the NEC2 is trying to collate a lot of these different documents together so they're more accessible for folks to have access to. But this is just one example. If you all haven't used Minivan before, this is a great tool for you to just print it out, share it with folks so they have that handy guide for that there. And just to backtrack a second too, in case y'all aren't familiar, Vote Builder is basically just the database that campaigns and DSA and other organizations that are engaging in electoral work use to keep track of all of this work that we're doing, right? And so Vote Builder has the voter file on it for your state, and you'll be able to pull lists of like what voters you want to contact. If you want to contact, you know, likely Democratic voters in a certain area, if you want to contact voters you know, in certain precincts based on certain demographic characteristics, all of those good things, you can curate these really specific lists based on what makes sense for your needs of your chapter and to help get that candidate or that ballot measure passed. And it also allows you to track in there the contact you've had with them. So you can put in there, like if they're a strong supporter, if they want to volunteer, if they weren't home and you need to come back, or if they spoke Spanish and you want to send somebody else out there that, you know, speaks Spanish so they can have a more in-depth conversation with them, all those good things that'll keep track in there. And Minivan is the app on our phone that we use when we go out canvassing. So that basically you'll get a list on there, and I'll have a list of all the addresses, folks' names, so you'll know who to go when you knock on their door. You'll know whose door to go to, who to ask for. And then it also has the script on there, so you can read through, answer all the questions, have all the information you need to have really successful conversations and to document those conversations so folks moving forward know what was the result of that. I'm sure a lot of y'all know that already, but just wanted to say that since that was kind of getting into some jargon. And DSA National actually has some, has Vote Builder available. And in some states, it might already be turned on for that state if there's other projects happening in your state that other folks have been using it. But whenever you're in doubt or if you ever have any questions, the best bet is to email orgtools@dsausa.org and CC compliance to see if you can get access for your chapter for the project that you're working on. And the reason we're CCing compliance is it just will help speed the process along because they'll be able to review it and then see like legally what you can and can't use it for, all that good stuff, just to make sure your chapter's in compliance, doing everything by the book, all that good stuff. So I will pause there to see if y'all have any questions about canvassing that we can dive into now. And of course, we'll have lots of time at the end to circle back to anything as well. Cool, awesome. Seeing none, I will toss it back over to Hannah to dive into phone banking.
Lovely. Thank you, Sierra. Okay, so let's talk phone banking. I feel like phone banking can be really polarizing. Maybe canvassing it as well, but I think phone banking, even the word, elicits strong reactions from people. I'm curious actually if everyone on the call could sort of like type in the chat kind of your feelings about phone banking, just because I'm curious if we have a bunch of people who really like it or feel sort of nervous on the phone, which is totally reasonable. I'm just curious. But I just wanted to share some of the ways in which phone banking contrasts with canvassing and these other methods, and share kind of some of the pros and cons. And then just like Sierra, I'll get into some of the specific tools that you can use to make phone calls quickly and efficiently. So first, let's talk about the pros. So you can get more IDs per hour. And again, that's sort of an ID is knowing where someone stands. So knowing if Sierra is a supporter of Bernie Sanders, for example, or is she still undecided? Might vote for Mayor Pete, we don't know. So that would be one major pro. You know, it's difficult for me to say what the average number of IDs or conversations that you're going to have in an hour when you're phone banking. I think it's kind of hard to say, it just depends. But I'm going to talk about that issue a little bit more in a minute when we get to tools. The other thing, it's cost effective. So, phone banking, you don't have to print anything out. People use their own devices, or sometimes if you're doing it in person, for an in-person phone bank, you might have loaners, like loaner laptops or iPads or whatever. The other thing is that there are a lot of options. So you can do everything from manual calls meaning just the way you would call your grandmother or your cousin on your cell phone, just popping in the number and then calling or using Google Voice, all the way down to really fast options like Through Talk and others that I'll talk about in a second. So let's talk about the cons. So phone banking can be scary. In some of these methods, and I'm sure there are people on the call who have done these methods, you're waiting to be connected with a voter, and sometimes it's silent, and then you hear a ding, and then that person has already answered the phone. So I know all of us who have done that know that feeling of tension, like I can feel it in my chest, even though I'm not on the phone, right? And then you, as that caller, have to sort of right away say, hi, my name is Hannah. I'm a volunteer with the Sierra White for School Board campaign. And we're just getting out the vote for Sierra and just wondering if you have a voting plan, right? You have to really kind of bring that energy. The other thing is that in my experience, phone banking does sort of require tech support, which I think just requires some planning to provide your callers. So I've done things like for a virtual phone bank, had a separate breakout room that we can send people to from the main Zoom if they're having trouble connecting to the dialer that we're using. Or of course, if you're doing an in-person phone bank, maybe you have a table for people who are brand new, something like that. Another con is your effectiveness of the calls can really vary based on the script. One thing that I think is great about some of these companies or methods, like let's say Hub Dialer or Through Talk, is that they can actually help coach you through the script as part of the service. And that can be really useful. Just catching up here in the chat. Oh yeah, absolutely. The effectiveness or the quality of the van list can vary based on your area for sure, which can be frustrating. We can also in the Q&A time talk about the different ways of getting voter data and that sort of thing. I'll stop for a second. Does anyone have questions about phone banking, pros and cons? Oh, Tom, go for it. Feel free to unmute.
It might not be related to pros and cons, but like how does one get the list of phone numbers to phone bank?
That's a great question. So Tom asked, like, how do you get that voter data or list of phone numbers to phone bank? So there are a couple ways. The first thing you could do, the simplest and cheapest thing you could do is you could call people you know, right? So that's sort of a relational version of phone banking, right? You could have people over to your house. They could write down people that they know, contacts they have in their phone and call them. The second thing you can do that is also free to us in DSA is to use what's called OpenVPB, which stands for Virtual Phone Bank. And that would be using that van list that we're able to typically get access to in DSA. And then lastly, like sort of to summarize, if you're working on a campaign that maybe has more resources, money-wise, you can also buy data that is more up to date. So I'll give you an example. Let's say let's say there is early voting, right? And you want to know who do we need to, whose doors do we need to knock on in those 4 days of GOTV before election day, and who can we skip because they've already voted. It's possible to get that sort of real-time ballot return data using different methods, and then you can call those people and say, hey, just checking to make sure you're planning to vote for Tom for school board or whatever. Does that answer your question, Tom?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so let's talk dialing options. So I mentioned the first one already, OpenVPB. This is a pretty great option, especially if you're still raising money or you're a particularly small chapter and maybe you're not able to get those resources. You are able to sort of plug in a script and plug in a voter list or even a volunteer list. You could call DSA members and say, hey, come out to our canvas. The other thing that is really cool about this is that it's recording the data for you. So you can set up different options. So let's say you call somebody and they say, please don't call me again, right? You can click do not call and they'll be removed from your list. So that is kind of our cheapest but slowest option. So, if you think about if you have to manually dial, it takes some time. A little bit faster is the hub dialer. Hub dialer is like a predictive dialing tool, which is able to automatically dial phone numbers. The one challenge with hub dialer is depending on what state you're in, there are different laws about whether you can auto dial, meaning like have a computer dial cell phone numbers. In California, you can only do that with landlines. So that can kind of affect who you're able to reach with hub dialer. And happy to answer more questions about that as well. So hub dialer has all the things that OpenVPB has, but it's a little bit faster. And I accidentally added an extra bubble on the slide, oops. But kind of the fastest option would be the dialers that are in the range of something like ThruTalk. And there are others that are similar, but this is the one that I personally have the most familiarity with. ThruTalk is an auto dialer completely, which means that the volunteer is on the phone waiting, and they're waiting to hear kind of like a ding sound, and that means that they're connected, right? So they don't have to worry about any answering machines. The other thing about ThruTalk is they actually have staff all across the country who are sitting at their computer and they're going click, 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 and that's them manually connecting you to cell phone numbers. And that's how, in California at least, they get around that law that says that you can't automatically connect to cell phones. So it's kind of cool. ThruTalk, I've heard two different statistics about the speed. One, that it is 10 times faster than manual dialing. So that means that people are able to have 10 times more conversations during their volunteer shift. I've also heard 15. I guess it just depends on the length of conversation. Through talk costs about a nickel a call. Trying to think other things to cover. Anybody have questions about these different options? No? Okay, awesome. Well, if you have questions later, we can get to them. Now I'll throw it over to Katie to talk about texting.
Awesome. Sarah, are we sharing your screen? Would you mind refreshing real quick? It's not super urgent.
Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you. Okay, so just like a quick, I'm sure everyone in this room, right, has gotten, raise your hand if you're on video or not, right? If you've gotten a politically charged text message in the last year. And if you haven't, you and I should talk after this, because if you're not on the list, and it's magical, I want to know, because everyone's gotten them, right? Everyone gets them. 98% of people actually read them. So it's like the quickest way, right, to move people from being inactive volunteers, right, to active volunteers. It's the quickest way to get people to events. It's the quickest way to tell people about things that are happening urgently. If you are, rapidly responding to something like Roe this week, right, the quickest way to get as many people as possible is by texting. It's a great way also to just drive people crazy that 2 weeks before election day, 2 weeks before the beginning of election day, right, to election day itself, because it's an easy and effective way to get to tons of people in a quick amount of time, right? So when you think about texting, I really like to think about it as this is the way that I can get to people quickly, right, and the most amount of people in the shortest amount of time, right? So this might not be on one end, right, when you think about canvassing and phone banking and text banking and relational organizing, right, this might not be the strongest bond or the strongest relationship that you'll have made with someone, right, because it's quick, but it's the quickest way to get in and out efficiently. Also, everybody loves to send texts. So if you've ever building a group of volunteer base, everyone loves to send them. They're easy. You can sit at your computer and you press the space bar over and over and over again. You can do it while you're watching TV. It's accessible, right? So people who might struggle walking, people who are maybe still concerned about COVID, people who don't want to get on the phone or might have issues getting on the phone, right, can still send texts. Right, short of us all battling and fighting inaccessibility to internet, right, and computers, this is going to be your most accessible option. It's easy and affordable, and it's good for targeting certain groups. And there's a lot of tools out there. I'm running through all this really quickly. I just want to make sure that we have lots of time for y'all at the end to ask questions and think about how you would apply these different aspects to your campaigns that you're working on. But text thinking is great, right? It's something that I think when we think about campaigns, everyone should build in kind of time and energy to their budget to have that rapid response. It's great for building recruitment and ensuring that people show up, right? Reminding people to be in certain places at certain times for things like canvases. Think about it this way. These are about 4 cents a text is what I've seen kind of backwards and forwards as your average scale kind of time frame. This is broken into what's called segments sometimes, just in case you're curious or confused by pricing when you're looking at it. A text segment is basically the number of characters that the phone companies will charge before they break it into a second text, right? So before the days of Apple iPhones where you could just send huge blocks of texts, right? You would actually have your text would show up as different parts. Each of those was technically called a segment. So it's technically about 2 cents per segment. Most campaigns that I've seen run 2 segments at a time or 4 cents a text. That's really digging into the weeds there. So we can definitely talk about more of what that means here in a bit, but just wanted to kind of give you a rough idea of what to expect when paying for texts. I know also DSA has a National Spoke account that I believe you can use and access, right, for free. So it's definitely something to consider before jumping in and building a contract. In addition to that, right, kind of something that Hannah talked about a little bit when talking about phone banking, there are a lot of new rules around text banking and sending texts to people based on kind of like certain types of phone numbers. It gets a little tricky and into the weeds, but just kind of highlighting that as like, there's a lot of new things that have happened in the last year, laws being passed and phone companies trying to prevent spam from happening. And in regards to that, right, preventing a lot of political texts from getting to people. So a lot of these companies are working and do a lot in the back end to support you in making sure that your texts are still being read by the people you're sending them to. The other big thing that we wanted to talk about is relational canvassing. And relational canvassing is one of my favorite things, like honestly, favorite things. And when it works, it's really successful. I want you all to think about a time where a friend suggested that you go somewhere or do something, right? Or join DSA, right? I think in a lot of the ways that we think about things, we talk a lot about those relationships, right? I would have never joined DSA if it wasn't for a friend calling me and asking me to go to a meeting, right? I would have never become an organizer if it wasn't for someone in an office that I was volunteering at telling me I was good at it, right? And asked me to do this work. So when we think about those relationships and those connections, right? Relational canvassing basically just takes advantage of those relationships, right? People trust their friends to tell them the cool new things that are happening, the cool new candidates they should trust, the issues that they should vote on. And when we have those relationships and those conversations and we track that data, you are 8 times more likely to get someone from like a door, right, their house to a polling location. Think about it this way, right? If I cold knock a door, it's gonna take me 2 hours. I'm gonna get maybe 13 people or 13 conversations in that 2 hours, right? And then we're gonna have to spend time and energy going back to those people I've identified and said are supporters multiple times to ensure that we get them from their house to the polling location before voting, right? In that same 2 hours, I could easily talk to 10 friends from the comfort of my own home, right? Tell them how important this race is, or this issue is, or this ballot initiative, right? And then I can take it on myself to text or call them before the election or go with them. Maybe we plan a party and I have all of my friends who I've talked to, right? Go with me to the voting location on the same day. I will flag that in some ways, volunteers actually have the hardest time with these conversations, right? Because it's one thing to talk to a stranger about it, right? And we haven't quite normalized in a lot of circles having these conversations with people that we know. And sometimes we still are battling that, you know, I'm happy to have it with someone I don't know, but I don't want to ruin a relationship by talking about politics, right? But I, again, always push through that by telling people, right, like the things that you do and love and watch on television and read, right, are all because people recommended you do those things, right? And so if you actually don't talk to them about politics, you're not supporting them or giving them the ability to like love the new things that you love. And so it's really important to have those conversations and build that kind of like understanding of the work that they're doing. I also will flag that there's some really great tools that help flag this. Empower is one of them. But kind of along those lines of like, these conversations are harder for volunteers to have. Sometimes the tools are a little bit harder to have too, or to use too, right? So accessibility tends to be a little bit of an issue or a barrier here, right? It's like one more app that someone has to load onto their phone. It's one more tool that they have to get to know. And so a really great and easy way of bypassing that is just creating your friends in the campaign or your volunteers a spreadsheet that they can drop all of the information in and update on their own, right? Making it super easy and accessible for them if the tool itself is becoming a barrier. I ran through a lot of that really quickly because I wanted to make sure that we made time at the end to kind of go over a quick activity, but also answer questions about y'all's races that you are working on now. I'm checking also my Slack to make sure that Hannah and Sierra are good. Yeah, so let's just talk really quickly about a couple scenarios. I'll set up, I'll talk the Texas County race, and then we can either talk about the Cincinnati congressional, or we can like use this space to kind of talk about your races and like how they might work. Yeah, So I was recently on a race in Texas. It was a county race. Our win number was 19,000. And we had an organizing budget of 15,000. We spent a lot of time talking about different avenues in which you can organize people, right? And so I always like to break this down and talk about, like, there is no one solution, right? There's a lot of ways to skin a cat, right? And so it's a lot of ways to win a race, as long as you can look at it and say, here's how the data works and the numbers work, right? So if my number is 19,000, I could spend my entire budget on canvassing, right? If I wanted to do that, right? If I did nothing else and all I wanted to do was knock on doors until I won the race, right? What we would do is take that win number, right? And to get that win number, I just took the election data from previous years, divided it by 2, added 1, and said, okay, to beat my opponent, this is how many people I need to be at the ballot, right? At the polling locations with their ballots and clicking the right button, right? For the lack of a better word. 19,000, right? So if I was just doing canvassing, I take that 19,000 number, I would say, okay, that's 19,000 doors I need to knock on, right? Then I would divide that number by the number of packets I would give volunteers, so 50, right? If I had 50 door packets, I'm going to do some math here, so hang tight while I do my math. And if you are smarter than me and want to divide 19,000 by 50 and give me a number before I get to it, right? 19,000 divided by 50, that'd be 380 slots, right? But we also know, right, that 50 doors doesn't mean I'm actually talking to 50 people, right? So that would be way off in the sense of, like, okay, hold on, right? That's 50 packets of 50. However, and that gave me 380 volunteer shifts, right? So I need to fill 380 volunteer shifts or 300 canvassing shifts, right, to hit 19,000 doors. That's not 19,000 people, right? It's 19,000 doors. 19,000 doors, right, just to go back to that number, would be, right, we said 20% rate, right? And that's not even 20% correct rate, right? 19,000 doors would only be 3,000 people, right? Just to kind of give you an idea of breakdown, right? So that means if I'm looking at this after 380 shifts and getting about 3,800 people, right, I'm still looking at quite a few numbers of people that I would have to make up to make that one number. That was a lot in a very short period of time. And we could go into, like, right now, how many texts would that look like, right? Or how many phone banking shifts would that look like? But wanted to give you kind of a brief idea of, like, what goes into the background of setting up your game plan and how you can kind of, like, hit each avenue. I've done a lot of talking, so I am going to back up and let you guys kind of use that mind frame, I guess, right? And ask questions for the next 10 minutes. Does that work with everybody?
What I was gonna say too, Katie, is we can all hop into a breakout room, so that way we can have more small group conversations and dive into scenarios that folks have and kind of chat through stuff more if there's realistic questions. And then we're of course happy to stay on after time too to keep answering any questions and stuff that y'all have, but certainly no pressure for other folks to stay on. But if folks do have questions, we're always happy to stay on until we get everything sorted out. But I will pop folks into some breakout rooms and I'll keep some people in the main room because I'll stay in here with you all. And so we'll have just some small groups with folks to join. And then you all should have gotten a message. Awesome. Cool. Hey, Alex. Hey, Michael. How are y'all?
Doing great.
Awesome. Cool. Alex, I think hopped into a breakout room. Cool. So I think it's us here, Michael. So cool. This is perfect. We can have some one-on-one time. Let me close my door because there's some noise from my roommate out there. But yeah, would love to. Does your chapter have any projects that y'all are working on right now that you think this might be good to kind of run through this activity for that, or happy to chat about?
I would love to learn a little bit more about what you have to offer just in general, because I'm a little bit newer to my DSA chapter.
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily aware of some of the outreach that they're already doing, to be honest with you.
Oh, I gotcha. That makes total sense. What chapter are you in? I'm sure you said earlier.
Phoenix DSA.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. Cool. Well, happy to have you out. So I would say probably the most, well, it depends on what your needs are, but one of the most helpful things we do is those one-on-one meetings that we dropped the Calendly link for earlier, because that's a great way for the different stakeholders that are involved in your chapter to come out and get either a specific training about something, like if y'all kind of don't know where to start with,
Yeah.
say canvassing, or say you've been kind of doing it, but you feel like you could like level up, could learn some like best practices, could do some like deeper dives and how to, make it more efficient. Like also happy to have trainings, conversations and stuff around that. So it really depends on kind of where y'all are at and kind of what your needs are. Like happy to do like kind of 101 level stuff if that's helpful, or like
that's absolutely helpful. Is that Calendly link, did you share that in the chat? I think that you did.
Yeah, and I can drop it again down so it's handy. And that'll set up the time, and it's good to put as much if you can reach out and like let us know independently of that too, like what you want. So that way we can prepare some stuff ahead of time. Because if folks just sign up for the Calendly link, that's awesome and like happy to chat. But it might be more of like, oh, let me get back to you with some of these different resources and stuff. But if you're able to kind of reach out, and I'll drop my email in the chat too.
Cool. Yeah, let me take that
down. So that way, if you're like, hey, we really want to do something around XYZ, we can maybe be a little more, prepared ahead of time, so we can come with some more thoughtful resources and stuff like that.
Yeah.
There's also
particularly just work with the outreach and the canvassing and or are you more communications?
Yeah, so there is a branch that does communications and stuff as well. My particular focus is just kind of on field and stuff. That's what I have the most experience in. Sure. And so if you have like specific needs like that, like if you have questions around fundraising or communications, stuff like that, we can always try to tag in some folks from those other subcommittees who have that experience in that. So there may be more, I certainly like always have thoughts, right? But it's not maybe the most informed thoughts. And so always good to have some folks on, like Hannah's on the fundraising committee actually too. So it's like, we always like to kind of pull in people from different places so we can kind of share our knowledge around. And
that's awesome. And I'm gonna take down your email here as well as the Calendly, and try and be a little bit more vocal in the Phoenix DSA and see if I can add some value there as it relates to some outreach.
Yeah, definitely. And we do trainings like this too. We're kind of assessing, like we just all kind of joined, started volunteering with this like in January is when the term started. So we're still in the process of figuring out what makes the most sense to chapters. Is it holding these kind of more mass trainings? Is it spending more effort on the one-on-one? And so if y'all ever have any feedback on that too, like always happy to adapt and adjust. Like we're just trying to figure out how we can be most helpful to chapters and what's the most beneficial, especially because there's just so much going on.
Is there any material from an educational standpoint that you typically will offer, or how does that typically work, coming down from sort of the national DSA to the local chapters? I'm just kind of curious from that perspective.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Is there any kind of materials like in particular in mind that you have? Because I could maybe have some more specific examples. Or
I would just say more in general for people that are a little bit newer to the cause, that are maybe just joining a chapter, if there's best practice of sort of, equipping those people and getting people up to speed. I don't know if there's usual sort of like a protocol there.
Yeah. So in terms of just like general stuff too, even outside of electoral organizing, there are a bunch of those socialist night school curriculums that come from different like national working groups and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that I found really handy when I was co-chair of Chattanooga DSA before I moved up here to Cincinnati, and that was something that I really helped for. And so that currently doesn't exist so much with the electoral organizing side of it. But I think, like I mentioned earlier, we're trying to like get just materials together in general. And I think that's something I hadn't thought of, but is a really good piece of that is kind of getting some readings together around like electoral organizing and all of these different, like just finding some, articles and stuff that were written.
Yeah.
I think that could be, if you think that would be helpful like that, yeah, I think could be something we add to our list of.
Yeah, because it's like, we get a whole bunch of new people joining, and what are the first steps for them to really get up to speed and know how to be an active voice in their own community, right? Like, I'm very proactive on joining these sort of calls, but I don't know that everyone else is, getting up to speed as it relates to content, or how to use their voice in the most appropriate way. And I think that could be a really helpful thing for people.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I like the idea of doing like a socialist night school curriculum, but around some of this more electoral stuff. Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Yeah, that's a really good flag. I just wrote that. I was jotting that down on a post-it note.
Cool.
So I
Yeah.
can to take it back to folks.
And I'll send you an email just to be able to stay in touch, because obviously it'll be really helpful to just stay in communication. And anything else on the calendar kind of coming up that you know of that would be helpful to continue to be a part of? I have my DSA Phoenix calendar open, but I don't necessarily have the DSA, the national one, open right now.
Yeah, we have a couple of 101 trainings coming up. So we have an electoral organizing 101 call that was originally slated to be before this one. So this was supposed to be kind of the follow-up to it, but
Okay.
a couple of different, there was the recommitment drive, so they had us reschedule, and now
Yeah.
we're bumping it slightly because of the there's a big call around Roe v. Wade that's happening at the same time that we were originally slated. So always being flexible, for these other priorities and stuff that pop up. But we have that coming up, and I can try to find the link for that while we're chatting here. And then there's also a ballot measure 101 that we're going to be doing at the latest June 15th, but I'm working with the person who's hosting it to see if we can possibly do it earlier, just in light of all the different initiatives and stuff that are happening that the Republicans are doing around the country. And to see if folks can get some stuff moving to get some kind of protections around some things. So that at the latest will be June 15th, or possibly earlier if we can get that. But I would keep an eye out for the calendar around that too, because that'll also be kind of 101, like ballot measure, kind of what that looks like, all that good stuff.
Yeah, because I just opened it up. It looks like May 12th, there's a free abortion on demand without apology. And then 18th, there's the electoral organizing 101.
Yes.
Cool. I just pulled that up.
Perfect. Yeah, and then we'll there's a community, I know they're working with to get a communications one on the calendar as well, and they've reached out to some folks that are experts in that field to help kind of do a communications 101 here, hopefully also coming up in the beginning and middle of June. We try to give about a month's notice ahead of time, so there's plenty of time for folks to sign up and all that good stuff. And I think also one around holding electeds accountable that's going to be coming up in June too.
What would the communications one be about? Is it particularly like types of outreach, or is it messaging more, or how does that kind of how does that look coming up?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly because I haven't gotten the description from them yet on what they're focusing on.
Okay.
I will be sure if they don't have that, if it's not clear in the description, I'll be sure that they kind of clarify what it is so folks can see when they're signing up, if it's kind of what they're looking for or not. Yeah. And then certainly if you're looking for something else, like definitely feel free to like email, sign up for Calendly. We can always do something, that kind of hits, what y'all's needs are, if that's
because I'm going to reach out to the Phoenix DSA and really see where maybe they need some help, as it relates to training, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And particularly where my interests lie are usually in the education side. I love reading, different books and stuff like that. And I'm trying to add value to my local community that way, or my local DSA chapter. So that's kind of what I'm focused on.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I think that's really great. That's a really important thing to do. Yeah. It's something that often gets overlooked. So really good.
And not everybody has time to read and kind of summarize stuff. So I try and add a little bit of value there and get involved with the more political education side of my DSA chapter. And that's one of the initiatives I'm personally passionate about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love doing political education stuff too. It's such a great way to get new members involved, especially too. It's like an easy thing for them to step into, but it's like really beneficial and important.
Yeah. And how do we communicate content to them without handing them like a 500-page book, right? So how do we give them maybe a presentation of a summary of ideas and get them excited about something without having to take the next month so that they can actually finish a book and they're busy and they'll never get around to it, things of that nature. So how do we just make it easier for people is really what I'm trying to make, explore.
Yeah. Are you tapped into the National Political Education Committee at all?
I'm not, but I would love to be. If you can connect me, I have no idea where to start there.
My only connection is I get their like mass email.
Yeah.
So let me see if I can pull that up, and possibly I can forward it to you if I can find it.
Yeah,
'Cause then
I'm gonna send you my email as well, just so you can. It's just myself and my wife. It's Michael and Svetlana at gmail.com. There you go.
because they do trainings and stuff as well. They have a National Political Educators Conference coming up on May 22nd.
Oh, that's cool. That's very cool.
Well, they're gonna probably dive into a lot of these questions and stuff that you're having. So
Yeah, that'd be super helpful, to be honest with you. Yeah.
I will forward this to you right now. Let's see. Hey, you all, welcome back, everybody. We were just over here chatting about some of the different tools and resources that are available and ways to access them and get involved. Did you all have any great conversations in your breakout rooms? Okay, you're on mute if you're talking. I'm sorry.
Oh, yep, there we go. Tom was just talking about how their little small group in California is small but mighty and looking to take some things on. We talked about deep canvassing. Yeah, pretty excited. Excited about all the things that you guys are up to and the work that you're doing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions that folks have, or anything else y'all wanna kind of dive into here? Oh, go ahead, Tom.
What has been the most interesting or exciting successful canvassing story that anyone here has experienced?
I'm sure we all could say some. Katie looks really excited, so I'll let her jump in.
I was canvassing on Super Bowl Sunday, and I got invited in on several occasions to and given food. I've also been given cookies, like when you're canvassing for somebody that everybody loves, in Texas, because it's such a Republican state. When you knock on doors for Democratic but also progressive candidates, and you get someone who's felt so alone for so many years, they're just so excited that you're there knocking on their door and that you exist, that they're like, yes, please have some cookies. Do you want a Gatorade? Can I give you my firstborn child to hug and hold? Here's a cat. Yeah, it's just all the things. So there's definitely moments of intimidation, but there's lots of really good stories that come around with it too.
One of my favorite ones, those are all awesome, Katie. Getting food and love is amazing. One of my favorite ones is we were canvassing for a DSA candidate and just out in a neighborhood, knocked on someone's door. They didn't know what DSA was, anything like that. They ended up getting super excited about the candidate and then went on to join DSA immediately right after, and then became one of our biggest canvassers. They were out every weekend then after that. And that was just somebody, knocked on their door, hadn't heard about the race, hadn't heard about DSA, and then was like, hell yeah, I love this. I'm so excited that this work is happening. I want to be involved in it. And then, so it's great to, of course, win stuff electorally, but also helps, just spread the word about DSA and building up your chapter's capacity too. And making folks, like Katie said, not feel alone and know that other people are out there that care about the same things that they do. Cool. That was a great question, Tom. Does anyone else have an awesome Canvas story that they want to share that they've had in the past, or just a voter contact story, or any questions, any other questions that y'all have too? Happy to answer those.
Okay, there we go. I have a question that is at least partially having to do with electoral work, or at least the methods that we have been discussing involving electoral work. It's perhaps more concerned with movement building. And obviously, alongside the electoral work, one of our primary concerns is making sure that our democracy survives so that we can actually have electoral work, I suppose you could say. And it's really sort of a twofold question, and I don't want to go on too long here because I know there are others, but one, I'm very interested in any aspect of building a pro-democracy movement that DSA might be involved in. And the second part of the question is any advice that you might have for me as a individual DSA member, or as a member of a smaller chapter, of what I might be able to do to make those connections to help build what I believe is a very necessary large mass multi-organization pro-democracy movement. Thank you.
I love that. I can jump in here if you guys are okay with it. First off, Alex, thank you for doing the work, right? Thank you for doing the work of a small chapter. It's hard. Sometimes say we all see you, and we see everybody in this room. It's hard work, and you guys are doing it, and you're doing it for all the right reasons, and you continue to do it. So awesome. There are so many ways that you could tackle this as an individual, but even as a small chapter. Alex, real quick, just for some context, what state are you in?
Sorry, I muted myself there. I am in the very southernmost part of Wisconsin, actually right on the border with Illinois.
Ah, love it. Okay. So I think something that's kind of growing right now, and it's actually really cool to see, is that chapters are organizing as a state, and they become kind of like these larger, right, like organizing machines, if you will, right? Realizing that, here in Texas, there was a congressional race that ran through 3 chapters, right? So like Austin had a huge powerhouse of membership, right? Where like San Marcos in between Austin and San Antonio had a much smaller membership group, and then San Antonio, while mighty, right, was still smaller than Austin, and so the 3 of us work better when all of us communicate with one another. It can provide resources, but also like it benefits everyone, right? Like when the Madison chapter knows what you're up to and what you need, and you guys can communicate with each other, and they might not have a priority that's super hot on their plate. Like they can provide resources. They can go and bus to you guys. They can phone bank for you from Madison, right, without having to travel at all. And when we build those connections with each other, we're only that much stronger, right? I mean, from anything from like mobilizing and building your chapter where it is, right, and talking to more people, to bringing in more electoral power, right, in your area that ultimately benefits them as well, especially when you talk about like state senate and houses, right? If they have people that their membership and endorsed candidates can work with. California has a statewide kind of like option where like they have actual like leadership committee positions that I think speak to each other and then organize together. So that would be probably like my number one recommendation. It'd be like bug people and get them to do what you ask them to do, and someone will.
I'll just jump in with another anecdote about statewide organizing. When I was down in Tennessee, we had a statewide Senate candidate that we endorsed, Marquita Bradshaw. And then we wanted to keep that momentum going of all the chapters kind of working together and staying in touch. So we planned a statewide convention that was over Zoom last summer. And it just helped mostly just to build relationships almost. Like, of course, we did knowledge sharing and all did presentations on like different projects we had, our different working groups, like all kinds of really awesome stuff. But for me, one of the biggest value adds was I got to form, relationships with folks that were in like Memphis, Knoxville, Nashville, like folks I otherwise might have briefly interacted with, on our organized Zoom meeting that we have with our region, but otherwise not really having real conversations with them, like talking about what their chapter looked like day to day. And then we tried to continue that movement from there. So when the protests were happening down, or when the solidarity actions were happening down in Bessemer around the union election, we folks from all the different chapters came down together and we had a solidarity caravan. So just looking for opportunities where you can build those relationships in and outside of electoral organizing, and keeping that energy going. So then when something does pop up, you're able to kind of move quickly together and already know who to contact and already have that trust built up. But that's a great question.
Thank you.
Cool. And I know we're 10 minutes over, so definitely if folks need to hop off, please feel free. I'll just kind of wrap it up here, but we are happy to stay on, answer any and all questions, chat more, as long as folks want to stay on. But just to wrap it up, I'm going to bump the link for our electoral outreach office hours. So if y'all have, want to host a training for your chapter to either do a really could be an entry level, canvas training. It could be something where you're we've been doing canvassing for a while, we've been doing it since Bernie, but we really want to level up and get some more best practices, see if we can make it more efficient. Whatever it is, we're happy to connect with y'all and find some folks that can speak to that. And if y'all are able to let us know in advance of the meeting too, not only just because when you schedule the Calendly, we kind of have that little bit of context and we'll see it on the calendar and somebody will be there. But it's always good too if you can reach out, be hey, we're really interested in getting this training scheduled around XYZ, so we can be a little more prepared coming into it, making sure we have all the materials there, making sure we have the best person on there. If y'all want to talk about fundraising or communications, we can try to pull in somebody from that committee too to help address that. I know certainly we all can probably speak to stuff a little bit, but it's always good to have some experts on the call if we have that time ahead to prep for it and figure all that stuff out. But just dropping that again, we have a couple different trainings coming up on the schedule. We're doing an electoral organizing 101 training, Hannah, Katie, and I here on the 18th, I believe, right, y'all? And then there's also a ballot measures 101 training that isn't on the calendar yet that we're getting launched here soon, I think for June 15th, to help folks if they're thinking about ballot measures, especially with all the stuff that's been going on recently that the Republicans are trying to pass in all these different states in light of Roe. And so there'll be lots of good things on that calendar, but certainly always feel free to reach out directly to set up a one-on-one conversation with us so we can make sure y'all have everything you need, or if you have any questions. Cool. But really appreciate y'all's time. It was great having y'all out. And yeah, I guess this will be the official end of the webinar, but we'll stay on, answer any questions, happy to chat, all that good stuff too.
One quick follow-up question. Do you know if there are any moves within National to sort of help facilitate the sort of broader organizing not to put too fine of a point on it, but basically the neo-fascist threat that we are now facing? And if so, who would basically be the best person to maybe get in contact with in National, just to sort of find out more, or to find out what I could do?
Katie and Hannah, do y'all have any ideas off the top of your head that you want to share?
I'm sorry, can you ask the question one more time?
Yeah, basically asking if you know of any moves within National to sort of help facilitate a more of a mass movement against the neo-fascist threat, and who I might be able to get into contact with to help out however I might. I really personally see this, at least at this moment in time, as being sort of the central hub from which all our other issues kind of come off of. That, obviously if the Republican Party has their way, democracy as we know it will be at an end, along with all the other things that we care about. I really feel that we need to do our part as democratic socialists to help or organize right here, right now, against this threat that's not even really emerging anymore. It's right there out in plain daylight.
Yeah.
I definitely hear that for sure. Yeah, I mean, throwing it back to you, I would still say the best option is probably to get in contact with like the chapters closest to you, just because on a national level, we are focusing on a lot of like Green New Deal stuff, which is great.
Yeah.
And I think you can definitely get plugged in there, right? It's like, we've got a really great kind of like national movement around some like, a slate of candidates who all endorse kind of like the Green New Deal policies. I think there's 6 of them. Anybody knows? But that sounds right. But also, I would say check in with your local chapters, right? Because it starts on the local level and works its way up, right? I definitely hear you, right? It's like congressional races and Senate races, and you've got quite a few of them in your backyard that you could greatly impact. So before I swing you like to another state, I want to say like, please help Wisconsin, because y'all need it.
Yeah.
And related, kind of building off of what Katie said, like definitely second that. Always good to reach out to the other chapters too, to see what they have going on that front. But there is a national working group. It's an anti-fascist working group, and it's on the DSA's national website, and they have a link to join on there. And so that might be a good place to look for like different resources and stuff, and see what, other chapters outside of your area and stuff are doing as well. Because I think they do some political education around there. And then they have like different activities and like workshops and stuff I think that they do. I'm not super plugged into their current work, so I don't have a lot of additional context, but that might be a really good place to kind of check out and then check in, with some other chapters and see what they have going on and what the working groups kind of priorities are and what that looks like over the coming months, especially, if you're interested in how it, as it relates to electoralism and stuff as well.
Definitely. All right. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming out and for your thoughtful questions.
Yeah. All right. You all take care.
Yeah, have a good night.